joining us, focus on the latest trends for high net worth families in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, investing both domestically and internationally. I'm joined by an esteemed panel of guests focused on different areas, going to shed light on the latest trends. This webinar is a build-up to our live event on Tuesday, 12th of November at the Hyatt Regency. Alaya, really excited about that event. And these two webinars, we've got one next week on succession planning, will help unpack some of those key trends in advance of that event. We're going to be making this session interactive. We've got some polls coming up shortly. We love getting good questions from our audience. So if you have questions, do put them in the Q&A, put them in the chat. I'm actively looking out for them, and we'll introduce them to our panelists as we move through. But before we get underway, just some quick introductions. I'm going to invite each of our panelists to introduce themselves, explain what they do, and also in the context of the clients in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Perhaps Daniel from ER Middle East, you could open the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much, David, and thank you everyone for joining today. I'm Daniel Dronsfield, the Client Services Director at ER Middle East. We assist companies and people entering the Saudi market and also the UAE market. As I'm sure everyone's aware, Saudi is extremely busy at the moment, and we're moving a lot of families and a lot of companies. So it's a very exciting time.
Fantastic. And Ben Lloyd from 1818 Venture Capital.
Thank you, David, Daniel. It's great to be here. Thanks for joining. I have a background living in Riyadh, working in the banking industry. I worked for Banque Saudi Fransi for 4 years, where I was responsible for a number of things. And one of those areas that I had some involvement was identifying and investing into new fintech opportunities. And really that rolls over into my new role, which as a venture capital investor, working for a very well-established firm, which invests between the UK and the Middle East in the financial services ecosystem.
Fantastic. A super interesting space. I look forward to digging into that. Camilla Dell from Black Brick.
Thank you, David. Great to be here. Hi, everybody. I'm Camilla Dell. I'm the managing partner and founder of a company called Black Brick. We are a real estate advisory firm, very much focused on looking after high net worth, ultra high net worth family office clients who are looking for advice when it comes to investing or buying homes in London and the countryside. And really looking forward to the webinar and also being in the Middle East next month.
Fantastic. Jiggy Rawal from Jellyfish Consulting.
Hi, David. Thank you. Jiggy Rawal. I'm the founder and managing partner at Jellyfish Consulting. We've been doing a lot of strategy execution, transformation work for both ultra high net worth family offices and for corporate clients, both largely internationally, including Saudi Arabia for the past several years.
Fantastic. Last but not least, Amgad Hussein from ZH Partners, Hourani.
Hello, hi. This is Amjad. Thank you for having me again. We are a full service law firm in Saudi Arabia. I'm based in the Riyadh office and I head up the Riyadh office. And we work with large international companies around the world doing business in Kingdom, in addition to our Saudi clients, whether they are government entities, quasi-government entities, families, family offices, and individuals that are investing and doing business either in Kingdom and abroad.
Fantastic. So before we get underway with our conversation, we're going to launch a couple of polls that are going to be discussed at the end. Perhaps, so if you could launch those, you can all of our attendees can have a vote on that. Those discussions, and then we'll come to the results later on. But I'm going to kick off our conversation with Amgad. It was great to have you on our panel last year and the webinars in the build up. There was lots of positivity about the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. I imagine that positivity and momentum has continued through 2024. But give us a picture. What's happened over the last 12 months? Has there been any particular developments?
Well, like the start of your presentation where it states the future is now, right? And that certainly has been going on in the kingdom. I mean, look, the economic outlook in Saudi Arabia for 2024 remains largely positive, driven by the Vision 2030 initiatives and robust government spending, which is a continuation from 2022 and 2023. We're still seeing significant investments in infrastructure, technology, tourism, for example. Um, we've had some global economic conditions and some challenges, including in the region quite recently. We're starting to see some of the um, headlines from the energy demand coming down and inflation, but still it's full steam ahead in Saudi Arabia because they recognize the need to diversify its economy, and it's been yielding results as well. And we can see that in the non-oil sectors that are experiencing growth and reforms in the financial markets and the regulatory systems, and that's creating an increasingly favorable business environment to do business in the kingdom, both for the local investors that are already here and our international clients.
Thanks. And I mean, we're going to hear from Ben in some detail on the fintech side and innovation. But I mean, what do you see of the different areas of the economy? You mentioned diverse, moving beyond the energy sectors. Do you
Yeah,
see fintech and the technology space developing in country?
yeah, absolutely. And you can see that in, like, for example, the Saudi Arabian Central Bank having issued all sorts of new licensings for payment platforms and other fintech companies. And you can see a heavy emphasis in the startup ecosystem. In Saudi Arabia, I mean, it's like no one is using cash these days, right? And you know, and there's been a heavy emphasis on, even by the government, um, in pushing fintech, insurtech, edutech as well. So we're seeing that, and it's been spearheaded by the government, and it's trickling down as well. So.
And how are you seeing the city of Riyadh develop? I mean, there's some grand projects going on, isn't there? Within the city, there's construction and cranes. When I was back there in May, it's there's a bustle, isn't there? What do you see the
The,
development of
the
Riyadh
cranes
city?
are they are like aliens attacking us, right? So they're coming from, north, south, east, west, and it just sort of keeps getting closer and closer and engulfing us. But yeah, from the Diriyah gate on one side, you have Qiddiya on the other side. We're just talking Riyadh specifically, as opposed to sort of Saudi generally.
Hmm.
You have King Salman Park and what have you. So, and they've just announced that the opening of the Riyadh Metro that has been under construction for the past 10 years. So we're very much looking forward to that as well.
Because the infrastructure piece is important, isn't it? As the city
Yeah,
kind of
absolutely.
evolves.
And Network Rail is actually one of the companies that is helping them operate the Riyadh
Fascinating.
Metro.
And what do you see of the developments out? Obviously, you're based in Riyadh, but developments in other parts of the country. What sort of filters back with the big projects elsewhere?
W- Well, there's definitely a heavy emphasis on Riyadh.
Hmm.
But at the same time, you can see, for example, in the Western province where they're catering towards the religious pilgrims, and also from the north all the way down from Neom and Amala and what have you. And so the tourism and also the religious tourism as well, for people coming to visit Mecca and
Hmm.
Medina, and the high speed rail that has actually already been opening, that has already opened and has been operating in the western part of the country. And then you have the eastern part of the country, which, still maintains its emphasis around Saudi Aramco and the heavy industrial projects. So, and yeah, it's quite exciting.
Fascinating. And how are you seeing international firms accessing some of this growth? Do you get more inquiries as a Saudi-based lawyer for firms looking to expand their opportunity in a more meaningful way?
Yeah, we are, and we are seeing. So, for example, whether it's in the um, in the tourism industry, we're seeing all the hotel operators, for example, expanding and bringing their services and what have you. I mean, just yesterday we had a meeting with the general manager of a very high-end boutique hotel from France, coming here because they were offered a spot to develop one of the spots in the Diriyah Gate which is in Riyadh. We're also seeing in terms of the services sector, where been a heavy emphasis on sort of training and mentoring the local population, because one of the key objectives of the 2030 plan is to create long-term sustainable growth and job opportunities for the local population. And so there's an important part to play by the international expertise coming in. And so we're seeing educational and training institutions as well playing a part in this. And then you have, whether it's the rail companies or whether it's providing specialized technical expertise in the specific subject matters. And another key area that we've seen a lot of development in is, for example, the mining industry,
Mm.
which, they're trying to create the whole ecosystem for long-term sustainable growth.
And for professional firms, there's an encouragement to set up. They might have been flying in and doing business, but there's more of a sense of to do real business in the country. You
Well,
want the local office and setup.
yeah, I mean, there's been the carrot and the stick approach. So initially it was the
Yes.
carrot, and now there's a little bit of the stick too, as well, where it's as if you do not have your in-kingdom local presence, then it becomes increasingly difficult to contract with a Saudi government entity or a quasi-Saudi government entity, right? Because they insist on contracting with a locally licensed legal entity. And so we're seeing more and more of that. And the reality is, Saudi Arabia remains over 75% of the Middle East GDP. If you want to have real sort of doing business in Kingdom, then you need to have a local legal presence in most cases.
Thank you, Amgad. I'm going to bring Daniel in a sec, but Ben, just quickly, I mean, obviously Amgad's painted a picture there of real excitement in the economy, the dynamism. I mean, that must be something that you have been following and been part of on the fintech side. I mean, what's your reflections on that?
Yeah, certainly. A lot of the things that Amgad's talking about are very familiar to me and familiar to the sector that I work in. And over the years that I lived in Riyadh working in banking and adjacent to the fintech scene, there were many, many changes from the implementation of the fintech sandbox to the first sandbox graduates becoming fully licensed. Now I think in Saudi Arabia you have over 200 fintechs, and about 100 of those who are fully licensed by the central bank, and all of that's happened within the last 4 or 5 years. So that's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the overall transformation that we're seeing.
Fantastic. Well, look, we'll come back for a deeper dive on that. But Daniel, I mean, tell us a little bit about your experience, particularly like the inward investment piece in the kingdom. What are you seeing on that front?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think sort of going off the back of what Amgan said about the carrot and the stick approach, there's I would say one of the biggest carrots that people are looking at is actually the growth and the size of the economy of Saudi. There's a huge amount of projects going on, and that's attracting a lot of people. You can't ignore it, especially if you're based in and around the region. It's yeah. If you wanted to, you'd probably find it difficult to ignore Saudi. But they have brought in some changes that are incentivizing people to set up more of a larger presence. So they've got the regional headquarters program. Now this is this offers them tax incentives. There's 0% corporation tax on qualifying income, 0% withholding tax if you're moving money out of the country, relaxation on some of the requirements for setting up. So Saudiization, which is the sort of national employment scheme where there's a certain number of employees that have to be local Saudis. They're sort of relaxing that a bit if you take your RHQ license, and then also some employment opportunities for dependents of people that work for RHQs. Not everybody qualifies for a regional headquarter, but ones that are being encouraged, I would say, is a good term to take them. And and we're only seeing that sort of spill out to other industries, to smaller companies, I should say, in terms of incentivizing them to go, because it kind of creates a bit like an ecosystem of you need different types of companies to support other different types of companies. If you look at the construction industry, you need suppliers, etc. So it's kind of bringing them all in at the same time.
I mean, Amgad, quickly, just do you see these incentive programs being utilized? Are they a major component of people's decision making, or there's already a momentum behind a decision and it's an extra sweetener? How do you see these programs?
Well, I think, you know, I said the carrot and the stick approach. I think Daniel said encouraged. That's code for the stick approach, right? So, but definitely for those that are coming in Kingdom, they are taking advantage of these incentives, right? In terms of the tax incentives and what have you, in particular for those who qualify for the regional headquarters office.
I think, sorry to just dump in again, David, if you look at it, so 2021, there was about 44 regional headquarters. At the end of 23, there's about 180 regional headquarters, and Q1 24, there was 125 new ones. So
Mm.
they're looking at about a 400% year on year growth in terms of regional headquarters.
And what are you seeing in terms of people actually moving there? I mean, mobility piece, Daniel, is a big part of your business. What are you seeing in terms of how livable is it for the expat the expat advisors who are coming and joining these businesses and boosting the population?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of changes that have happened in Saudi over the last few years, which has opened it up a little bit more and is becoming a little bit more desirable for people to move to. A lot of it's precipitated by some of these big projects and the sort of other sort of general growth in Saudi. They need the people, right? And we've
Mm.
got a lot of consulting companies that we work with that are just massively increasing their headcount. And where you would see, if I sort of anecdotally from Dubai maybe 2, 3 years ago, you would have the breadwinner of the family, for example, going out to Saudi and coming back and forth at weekends. Now we're seeing a lot more families actually moving with the children, moving with husbands and wives, just because the environment is becoming a little bit more desirable for them, and schooling's getting better, the living accommodation and healthcare, all of that kind of plays into it. It's becoming a lot more developed.
And Ben, I mean, what was your experience living in the kingdom for those years where you were working there?
Yeah, I think it's important to give a balanced view still. Definitely, I recognise that it's changed a lot. And when I started flying out there in 2019, that the flights from Heathrow pretty much only had upper middle-aged men on them. Now they are families and kids and children and women. It's changed a lot anecdotally, but there's still a long way to go. I think that the value proposition that Riyadh offers versus Abu Dhabi or Dubai is very different.
Mm.
And I think the point about regional head offices is a key one, but it's more about who's still fly in, fly out, who's actually 100% based in the kingdom, how much office floor space are they taking, how many bums on chairs are actually relocating there. So I think definitely we're seeing a big shift, but there's still a little gap to go before Riyadh is offering the same value proposition as Dubai and Abu Dhabi. But it is getting there,
Mm.
and big things are changing. I think King Abdulaziz Park, when it finally opens, will put a kind of big green lung in the middle of the city, a bit like in Abu Dhabi and Dubai. You have this recreational space, which is really the focus of the city. It will be the same when the park opens. So there are lots of enabling factors and kind of trains that need to come into the station at the same time. There's already been a lot of change, and I think the next 10 years you'll see a lot more of that actually manifest and be delivered. One of the things that I'm conscious of with KSA is that because the marketing is so incredible and the investment is so incredible, our expectations are so high for what can actually be delivered in such a short space of time.
Mm.
And trust me, in my time there, I actually at the beginning was skeptical that some of these things would be delivered. And now, 5 years later, I'm visiting some of these sites, and they're actually amazing. They're world class. I'm talking about Alula, for example, and the KFD and Daraya, what they've done there.
Mm.
5 years ago, I didn't think they'd be able to turn them into world leading destinations, but they actually are. But I think we still have 5 to 10 more years before many of these lifestyle factors will truly be kind of mature enough that you'll see people staying in Riyadh intergenerationally.
Super interesting. And Daniel, I mean, the leisure and tourism offering in the country is a big part of it, isn't it? As Amgad touched on. I mean, how do you see that in your business?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the main drivers that's sort of driving the families moving. There's a lot more to do. If you look at tourism, it doubled between 2022 and 2023 in terms of international inbound. And I think Ben was alluding to it with Alula, and there's other World Heritage and UNESCO sites which now have the infrastructure to support the number of guests. You've got some of the Red Sea resorts that are being developed, which look absolutely stunning, which are just continuing to sort of drive that growth, not just Riyadh, but in other sort of parts around the kingdom. And a lot of sporting events are being held now in Saudi. You've got the F1, you've got all the boxing. I'm not the biggest football fan, but there's a lot of football players that are moving over to Saudi, which is just creating another industry which wasn't there previously, and driving sports tourism. I especially know for the boxing that just happened, it was basically Dubai had moved over to Saudi for the weekend for that, and you get the same with the Formula One too. But there has been, I don't know if challenges are the right word, or challenges is the right word, in terms of companies going in supplying that market. One of my clients I work with in the tourism industry really found it hard to get lifeguards, because there's not a huge amount of trained lifeguards in Saudi. And it's just some of those sort of things you don't necessarily think about, that can that cause a bit of a challenge. But look, I mean, the amount of sort of money that's being thrown around, those problems can get sorted out pretty quickly.
And Amgad, on the sports sector side, I mean, last time I think you mentioned it was a bit of a red herring, really, or it was not. Don't place too much importance on sport, because the size of the economy, the makeup of the economy, makes sport something that's not obviously a dominant force. It's just something that's there, that's driving interest, I suppose, and headlines.
Well, I think it's good for marketing, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I was in the United States over the summer in the Midwest, and you had people walking around, little kids walking around supermarkets wearing Ronaldo jerseys, and you had, wearing El Hilal jerseys, and Saudi soccer team jerseys, and so it is something. I mean, I guess we talk about anecdotal, but certainly you can see it in terms of helping the image and putting the
Mm.
word out there, especially for Saudi tourism. And I think it's about the aggregation of the marginal gains, let's say. So you have the Formula One racing, you have the soccer, you have Cardi B coming in doing a concert, you have the boxing and MMA and what have you. And so when you add it all up, you know, um, it does, sort of create quite the noise,
Mm.
in particular outside when people start looking at Saudi and looking at other opportunities in Saudi Arabia.
Great. Well, thank you. And our Q&A is open. Please do add any questions as we move through, because I'd be delighted to bring the panelists in on them. So I'm actively looking out for those Q&A questions. But I'm just going to turn to Jiggy now. And, we've heard a sense, Jiggy, of opportunities at home. We know there's opportunities abroad as well for Saudi families, which we're gonna come along to. But you work closely in the family office sector. You help families in Saudi create a strategy. Why is it important to have a coherent strategy amongst all the opportunities that might come across their desk?
Well, I guess family offices, like with many organizations, they vary in size, complexity, structures, SFOs to MFOs to regulatory entities kind of thing. Most family offices have a handful of staff, up to 15, probably, they're not big in resources. As the guys have already said, Amgad and Daniel and Ben, that there is a massive growth in the Middle East taking place, across all the sectors and stuff, and that means there's a whole generation of wealth coming through, and so the family office landscape is growing, and we've seen that in 24, through the various UBS reports or the PwC and the Deloitte reports and stuff, that the AUM of family offices is expected to grow in 24, and is actually a bigger percentage of overall growth in wealth, of family offices expected in 24. So, there's all of that. For all of that to happen, there is a lot of change taking place across the spectrum. And some of those changes include things like professionalization of family offices, family offices are becoming more professional in their very nature. They're hiring more professional staff, so from hedge funds, investment banks, that sort of stuff. Some of them, the size of them have, are challenging investment firms as well. So even though they are classified as a family office, they are equivalent of family, some investment firm sizes and stuff. So there's some, there is a regulatory spotlight that's beginning to start taking place slowly within this space as well. As you see the professionalization taking place, you have things like succession planning that plays a part in this kind of thing. We're seeing greater degree of asset allocation and diversification of broader asset categories coming into family offices. So, for example, in 21, roughly 22% of the family office's portfolio was private equity. That grew to nearly 30% in 23, and we're seeing a bigger growth of that in 24. When you put all of this together, what you get is a mixing pot of a complex organization with a multitude of moving parts. And when you do that, it becomes like any organization. You have to put a plan in place to tackle each of these little parts that come together in a coherent way. Otherwise, you're going to start steering yourself. You can take advantage of opportunities, but are they the right opportunities and are they the right time? And have you got the right skills? Have you got the right risk portfolio? Have you got all these things in place to make sure that it's a success? And the strategy is just a tool to help you kind of get your arms around that and make sure you are focused in the right direction.
Very interesting. Just to bring Camilla in, I mean, family offices in Saudi, they're likely to have exposure to London real estate, prime London real estate. How would you fit and work with the family office around things like that Jiggy just touched on there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some of them absolutely already have exposure to UK real estate. But I meet an incredible number of families and clients from the region who don't. They've been growing their wealth locally at home, and so I think there's a lot of untapped potential there. So how we work with and how we help clients is really to, understand their needs and to represent them here in the market to make sure that they are properly advised. I think it's very, very difficult to buy property in London. It's an extremely complex market. 40% of our clients are actually Londoners. So that just shows you how difficult it is. So I think, trying to do it from overseas is almost impossible. So, we've had some, brilliant experiences and looked after some wonderful clients and families and royal families as well. We've been privileged enough to represent royal families in Saudi who are building portfolios. Initially they might come to us looking to do something very small. They just want to diversify. They want to have a little bit of UK real estate in their portfolios, and we can help them to build up a strategy and access the market and do that in the right way. And then from that leads other things. Yes, often they'll perhaps already have a main home in London, but they might want to also then have a country estate, something, a lot of clients in the Middle East love to escape the hot summer months. And the UK is, one of the key destinations that they really enjoy coming to. So whilst they may have their London residence, sometimes they haven't thought about where they might go to have a bit of downtime and have that country estate. So, we've helped clients to do that as well.
Fantastic. We'll come back to you shortly in a sec to dig into the London property piece a bit more fully. But Ben, also just quickly on the family office side, I mean, what's your experience as working within a venture capital fund? What's your sense of the family office scene in Saudi that you were starting to mention?
It's important and increasingly important, and we've already discussed it, and Jiggy referred to it, that there's a transfer of wealth at the moment between the traditional family principle, and if you think about the family wealth in Saudi Arabia, it's not an old country, and so we're not talking about 400 or 500 years worth of wealth like you have in the UK with various aristocracy. It's relatively young, and actually most of that wealth was generated adjacently to Aramco in the Eastern Province over the last 50 or 60 years, and that's where a lot of the family offices and the big family names that most people on this call recognize are based. And the people who founded those businesses, whether they're logistics, industrial, chemicals, they're still involved in the business, and they're on the board, they're the chair, but now they're quite old, and so there is a transition of wealth between those generations, more so than there has ever been before, just by virtue of the age of the family assets. And the younger generation, it's no secret, are much more interested in digital technologies, in investing globally. Camilla will know that Saudis have a big taste for traditional real estate assets. That is shifting slightly within the family offices as they seek to allocate more to alternatives. So certainly for us, we know lots of the big Saudi families, and they're all increasing their venture allocation.
Thank you. I'm going to come back to Jiggy in a sec, but Camilla, on that taste point, I mean, do younger Saudi clients want something different to their parents property-wise if they're looking in London? What's your feel on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think they do. I think traditionally, the older generations, would have typically just only bought freehold. They don't understand the leasehold system here in the UK. So, anything on a lease was just a complete no-no. So only freehold houses. And now, we see that changing and developing, looking after younger generation clients. They're much more open-minded, so they will look at apartments, they will look at the market from an investment perspective as well. We looked after a royal family from Saudi, a young royal. And the first piece of business that they did with us, it was pure wealth diversification, and they really allowed us to guide them. We ended up buying 12 apartments for them in London. 6 were in Islington and 6 were in Shoreditch. I don't think you ever would have had Saudi royal families investing in those parts of London historically, but I think the younger generation are much more open-minded, and they're really just looking at this purely from an investment perspective, on that side of things. When it comes to their own personal homes, obviously there's a lot more personal taste involved. I think Saudi clients in general do still, especially the ultra high net worth, do still really like the privacy and security of having a freehold home. But we also look after the business community. There's a lot of wealth being generated in Saudi at the moment, and more recently we looked after a businessman from Saudi who just wanted to have a holiday home here in London. We bought him an apartment in a very nice part of London for about £3 million. So there's a real range of requirements that we see from clients from this part of the world. But I think tastes and trends definitely changing from one generation to another.
Fantastic. And Jiggy, I mean, just building on that next gen point that Ben talked about. I mean, I know it's a big theme for you. How you get the family to coalesce around an idea. The wealth that's going to transfer has to be done so in a well-considered strategic fashion, doesn't it? So what's your perspective on the next gen in Saudi and how the family involve and incorporate them in that transition and transfer?
It's actually quite an interesting dynamic, that one, because there is still so much. So the training and the mentoring hasn't yet quite taken place between the generations. There is generally a different viewpoint of where family wealth was created to maybe where the next family see the wealth going, or the areas that they want to play in. We've seen a family office who've been in food and manufacturing, and now the next generation want to buy football clubs. It's chalk and cheese. How do we get from A to B? Do we have the right skill sets in the family office to contend with this? Do we have the right plan in place to move from one to the next? And getting them around the table to actually focus on this with a view. I mean, some of the reports recently have shown that nearly 30% of family offices don't like talking about succession planning. That's quite a large number. There's belief that nearly 25% of them don't believe that next generation can take over. And on average, only one person in a family member sits within a family office as an employee. When you take all of that into account, succession planning is quite a challenge that people need to come around the table and kind of go, okay, well, where do we want to go in the future? Where are we today? Where are the gaps, and how are we going to bridge those? because ultimately the family office was created as a form of transferring wealth from one generation to the next. That's the underlying proposition behind it.
And I mean, how do you help families appraise the investments and make sense of the investments they've got and look at underlying performance? I mean, you've worked a lot in the country over the years, so perhaps tell us a little bit about your experience in helping clients actually unpack some of these investments they've got and improve and enhance.
So the performance has to look at the overall holistic spectrum of things. So it's not just the monetary element, but it is the skills. How does it fit within the risk tolerances or the appetite of the family? What is the risk profile of the family? Are they too heavily weighted in one or the other? Where is the future direction of going, and breaking it down into short, medium, long-term goals, kind of going, and have we got enough of the balance in each of them? But then looking at the risk profile within those, have they got the right skill sets going through the families to be able to cater to each of the portfolios as they diversify? So yes, buying a real estate is great, but do they understand the real estate market? Buying a football club is great, but that's completely different. And do we have the right skill sets? Things like financials, and a lot of people forget the capital calls. So the move into direct private equity investment means that there will be capital calls placed at certain times, but do we understand the profile of these capital calls, and these types of things? So helping them kind of first of all understand the risks that they have, to then go, well, where are the opportunities that come with those risks? Because there is that flip side of kind of going, how do we manage those risks, or how do we mitigate those risks in order to drive better performance?
Thanks. And Amgad, how do you see this wealth transfer between an older generation in charge of the business, then children coming through? There's a decision, oh, do we want to cash out because I can't see an heir coming through, or do you see the family business transfer in a sort of
Yeah,
structured
I mean,
fashion?
we're seeing the same things that, just to echo what Jiggy and Camilla and Ben and what have you were talking about. It's always a tricky situation, right? Especially for those who don't make it through to the other side. We've seen some of the infighting, unfortunately, but we've also seen a lot of the families take advantage of the Saudi Arabian capital market system, where they may list a key business asset that they wish to continue going, and where the family can remain as a majority or a minority shareholder, but this time of a listed entity, and where you can bring in outside investors and shareholders and what have you, or where they allow for um, private equity or a strategic shareholder to come into a key, especially with regards to operating businesses, right? And then we've
Mm.
seen the transformation of the Saudi Arabian Companies Law and other sort of key legislation that allows for family charters and documentation governing the relationship between family members to be, let's say, much more recognized and enforceable before the local courts, and taking advantage of structuring the family's assets even outside the kingdom, whether it's in the UAE or Jersey and
Mm.
Guernsey and other places like that, with regards to assets that are in like the United Kingdom and Europe and abroad. So, and in particular, there has been a greater emphasis by the government to force these families to do this and to encourage them to do this. And so they're looking at it quite seriously, and to hire consultants and advisors and what have you to sort of help them along the way.
Thank you. And Ben, I mean, do you see Jiggy mentioned about next generation wanting to get into different fields? It's perhaps different to where the family business has been. And in fintech and innovation, people can be an amateur investor, if you like. They're not in a strategic way looking at opportunities in the same way that a fund manager would. How do you see it, what you
Yeah,
do
well,
fitting?
I'd say you do actually have both. You have some families that do just have an academic or commercial interest in a particular industry or area, but then you also have the family groups that are investing for adjacency, whether they have an internet services business, and so they want to invest in early stage cyber firms, for example. So there are a number of families that are quite specific with their early stage investing, and then there are families which are more interested in whatever they can discover at that time. And I think one of the key things to highlight is that it's domestic and international still. So whilst there's a lot of overheating in the Saudi early stage investment market, these investors are still very much accessing managers abroad. And Amgad, you mentioned Guernsey. Our firm's based in Guernsey. It has a long tradition as a jurisdiction for interacting and managing, whether it's through fiduciaries or lawyers or fund managers, the wealth of Saudi institutions, families. So definitely there's still a lot of capital that's leaving the kingdom. But one of the things that we've noticed, and actually we believe in and we propagate, and that's one of our, I guess, selling points as a firm, is that we invest into early stage financial services businesses that have an applicability both in the UK and in Saudi Arabia. There's a strong connection between both of the markets, and everyone on this call is here for a reason, because we're part of that bridge between the UK and Saudi Arabia. And outside of this community, what a lot of people don't know is that you have very, very similar financial services regulatory regimes, both from a kind of prudential level and also from a fintech level. You have the same open banking standards, you have the same payments infrastructure, you have many, many similarities, and actually, therefore, business model arbitrage in both directions is really possible. And a lot of Saudi investors or investors into Saudi aren't also looking at how we can export things from Saudi, and whether they're fintech ideas or other types of firms. And that's exactly the kind of thing that we do. We import UK business models into Saudi and Saudi business models into the UK. And that's something that I think resonates really, really well with our clients and with Saudi families, because they're able to do the signaling that they wish to do, which is backing the Saudi economy, but then they're also still getting exposure to the best of the crop in terms of innovation.
Very interesting. We'll come back to you on that. But Jiggy, just quickly on Ben's point around using different markets, having a road tested concept, the fact that UK and Saudi are places that you can develop new ideas. I mean, what's your take? You've been in businesses before that have developed brand new markets in financial services. What's your read on opportunities here, such that Ben started to outline?
It's a great point. Where we've got tried and tested models that have worked, the ability to lift and shift those into Saudi markets has worked quite well. Where it's been really positive has been they've been, in the Saudi markets, been able to kind of see where things have perhaps not worked so well in models before, and what they've been able to do is kind of improve upon those and kind of go, how do we execute that better? And so the development of those sectors, and like if we look at the fintech space, the huge amount of growth that's taking space in the fintech space is incredible. Because they've seen some of the benefits of what we've done here, for example, in the UK markets, and gone, how do we really develop those? Where do we see those weaknesses and stuff, and really apply those? And the regulatory frameworks again have been quite positive in SAMA, and the other bodies have all kind of taken heed of things like the PRA and the FCA rules that we have here, and applied those as well. So we are seeing a quicker growth, more dynamic market in Saudi as a result of that, in the tech space, in the data spaces, data sciences, all of those types of areas. They're taking more advantage of AI, for example, at a much quicker pace than we are, for example, here in the UK markets.
Thank you. And still plenty of time for questions. We've got 15 minutes left. Do get your questions in the Q&A, and I will bring them onto our panel. But Camilla, just to come back to you to kind of drill into the London property scene. I mean, for those based here, we take for granted kind of some of the headlines, but give us a sense of, for the international investors, what's some of the market commentary? How do you explain what's happening in prime London right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think sentiment is pretty weak, and there's been a lot of negative headlines since the new Labour government took over around increasing taxation, and so understandably, I think that's giving a lot of pause for thought. As a buying agent, I kind of thrive off negative headlines because we see the current market right now. As an interesting opportunity to actually negotiate significant discounts for our clients. There's definitely right now subdued feeling in real estate in London. There are fewer buyers. Some buyers are sort of sitting on the fence waiting for the budget at the end of the month. But there are some buyers that think, well, now's the time to take advantage of a quiet market. And I happen to think, look, I remain optimistic, ever the optimist. I think that the budget at the end of the month probably won't be as bad as we all feared. I was very, very encouraged yesterday or early this morning when it was announced that capital gains tax on property will not go up. I thought that was a win for the property market. I think things that anyone thinking of buying who's based overseas needs to take into consideration is probably stamp duty will go up, and that will be announced in the budget. But I think we're looking at a 1 point increase. So I don't think that's going to make the difference between somebody in Saudi thinking whether they will or won't buy. So there are challenges, but I think for us, we 100% see the market right now as a buyer's market. Pricing is softer. There's less competition and there's more supply. And I think at the end of the day, London will always be an attractive place to own and hold real estate for the long term. Labour government, when you look back, traditionally, real estate has always performed better under a Labour government. So I'll leave that thought there.
Okay, thank you. And what kind of properties do you help buy? I mean, you get a specific mandate, don't you? So client comes to you. Just walk us through what a brief might look like, how you might operate and work with them.
Sure. So, briefs vary widely, hugely from client to client. But as a business, we look after and advise clients who are spending a minimum of £1 million upwards. There's no maximum. The largest transaction that we've been involved with this year is just over 40 million for a Saudi client, and everything in between. But briefs vary. We look after a lot of clients who are buying homes here because they want to spend time here during the summer. That is a classic Middle Eastern requirement will be, we love coming to London in the summer. We don't want to stay in hotels anymore. We'd like to have a home there. We also look after a lot of overseas families who are choosing to educate their children here. I mean, yes, I think education is improving in the region, but at the end of the day, I think London still has leading universities, leading boarding schools, leading education. So a lot of families will send their children to be educated here, and that will naturally lead to wanting to have some sort of base in London. And then we have some clients who are relocating to the UK still, and some clients who want to invest. A lot of my clients in the region are very, very sophisticated investors. They already own huge portfolios of property globally, including in London, but they want to take advantage of the market. They want to get access to distressed opportunities, and often those sorts of things are not on the market. So what we're very, very good at BlackBrick is hunting out opportunities that are difficult to find.
Fantastic. Thank you, Camilla. There's a couple of questions in the Q&A. One for you, Amgad, is just to say, what are the jurisdictions that Saudi families are expressing an interest in mostly? I mean, I presume this could be either for investment, i.e. where the underlying assets are, or structuring. Are there any trends in flows of investment outbound from Saudi that you can observe?
I would say outside of the region, it would primarily be Europe with a specific emphasis on France and the United Kingdom and the key sort of cities in the United States.
So Europe and US really
Yeah,
is still,
that's
yeah,
still I would say the
very
main focus.
interesting. And there's a question for you, Daniel, just saying, is there a trend regarding countries from which people are moving to Saudi from? So are there any, for your relocation clients, where are you seeing people coming from, if there is any trends?
Yeah, I mean, you've had a bit of an exodus out of the UAE because obviously I think the close proximity companies are shifting over to open up their businesses in Saudi, and with that comes staff. Now, what we're seeing at the moment is a lot of companies, let's say from the US, are moving in a lot of staff. We've got it seems to be like a sort of second wave of sort of activity with regards to a lot of these sort of mega and giga projects um, which are sort of entering that next phase where you've got the likes of PwC, KPMG, McKinsey. Those big players are now moving in 100 staff by the end of the year, and
Mm.
typically by the nature of their business, they are from all over the world. But typically, we're seeing a lot of European and American people moving in.
Okay, thank you. No, that's very interesting. And Ben, just to come to you, I mean, building on what Jiggy said in her previous comment around AI and adoption of AI in the investment landscape. I mean, what's your perspective on how AI is being implemented in Saudi,
Yeah.
utilized in the companies that you talk to?
Yeah, I mean, a good technical question. I think a lot of people are getting carried away with what AI is and what AI isn't,
Mm.
and definitely in the bank I was working at in Saudi since 2019 or before, we've been using a form of AI, machine learning, robotic process engineering. All of this is a subset of artificial intelligence. It's not what we recognize as ChatGPT,
Mm.
but it still is artificial intelligence, and many firms in Saudi Arabia and globally have been running artificial intelligence under the kind of less sexy product set than large language models for quite some time. Um, I mean, we more generally as investors have seen, we see lots of different hype cycles. That's really what we're in the business of, is trying to look through what is hype and what is going to create fundamental real value to an economy over the long term. And we're definitely through the AI hype from what we're seeing, and we look at businesses that do put the six practices of AI to some use within their business model. And I think this is just a sensible evolution of investment criteria, but it's not something that we particularly flag. We're not blinded by people covering their investment decks in AI this, AI that. There has to be a real practiced evidenced use and a model that is either proprietary and has enough data that it's actually of any meaningful use in terms of statistical significance. So Saudi is an adopter to AI. UK is an adopter. US is an adopter to AI. I think actually the biggest barrier, in my experience, to the adoption of AI is not the applicability of the technology, but often the people who are working in that organization and their ability to understand, comprehend whether they want to be part of a transformation or a change. And just to link that to Saudi, I think one of the things that is more difficult there, both in the private and the public sector, so in public companies, is these companies are still very often closely controlled by family members or board members. And so actually I think the long-term sustainability of some of the big Saudi companies is more dependent upon board composition than in some other markets, because most of the banks in Saudi are controlled by a relatively small number of families. And if those family members love AI, then the bank will love AI.
Mm.
If they don't, then the bank won't. So it's quite interesting, I think, in KSA how still the influence of the private wealth and the family members is in every single public company and every single large company, and that really is the barrier to some of these firms delivering innovation, because the people on the ground in the organization, of course they want the transformation and the innovation. So board composition is really important for Saudi businesses.
Super interesting. Daniel, did you have a point on that?
Yeah. Just sort of on the back of what Ben said there. If I sort of look back and look at sort of companies I was advising, let's say 2 years ago, they would be your sort of, I would say, typical companies you'd expect to go into Saudi, so construction companies and all that good stuff. But in the last year, there has been a real shift to that I'm dealing with a lot more companies that have fintech products that are looking to enter the kingdom, whether that's, and I'm not an expert in these things, so I'll probably use all the wrong terminology, but sort of plugging into existing tech, and whether that's a new reporting tool for the banking system or payment gateways and stuff. We're certainly seeing, at least from my perspective, an increase in those types of companies that are moving into Saudi. And I think I think I read somewhere the other day that the fintech economy by 2029 is going to, increase by 20-30% or something like that. And you're sort of definitely seeing that with companies that are looking to enter.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
I mean, a brilliant point, and I really agree. It's changing quickly. I mean, just to put it into some numbers around it, in terms of there is a distance to go. So, in the UK, there's about 1,800 fintechs and about 100,000 direct employees within fintech. And in the first half of this year, nearly £7 billion was invested into fintechs. We don't know the numbers for the full year because the full year hasn't finished. In Saudi last year, it was less than 3 billion riyals in the entire year. So there's still a very, very, very long way to go in terms of the amount of investment that's required for a full fintech transformation within the kingdom. But the population are ready for it. They're driving it. The skills are being developed in the universities and in the schools. Firms like yours, Daniel, are helping bring in even more talent and building the knowledge economy around fintech. I think that's one of the key things. And London is a fintech leader, not because of fintech, but because of the legal system, the accountants, the fiduciaries, the access to capital. All of these things need to exist in harmony for an industry to really take root. And all of those jigsaw pieces are gradually being put into place. But again, it's going to take a little bit of time, I think. But there's definitely a shift, I think, of the types of firms that are trying to enter the kingdom.
How would you contrast the fintech scene here in the UK with, say, the US? Like you mentioned there, the ecosystem that's here in London in the UK. But for people based in the kingdom looking at global opportunities, is there a way to characterize?
I think. Look, I can contrast it in a few different ways, and also bring in Saudi. The UK, I think, is still the innovation center with proximity to the Middle East for fintech, and I think that's because of access to capital, the talent pool that exists here in the intersection of London, with the oldest financial services markets. UK has a very kind of diverse subsectors within financial services. Truly a global industry in terms of capital flows, but across payments, regtech, open banking, insurtech, cryptocurrency, private wealth. London, UK has it all. And I think it's a small enough that you have kind of consistent regulation, which is the key thing. To contrast that with the US is obviously a much bigger market, and so its potential to eventually deliver much bigger businesses and much bigger returns. But it's incredibly fragmented. You have lots of financial services regulation at a federal level and at a state level. So it's actually a lot more difficult to get access to the US financial services market, and a lot more difficult to scale in the US. So we think that the UK is actually still a great place for fintech innovation. To contrast that with Saudi, I think one of the evolutions the fintech ecosystem is going through, and in the UK, I would say it's a very collegiate and collaborative fintech community. It's all about enlarging the size of the pie rather than directly competing necessarily. And that's because in the UK, there's a big tradition of exporting our products to Europe, to the US, around the world. We see the UK as a launch pad rather than, just the domestic economy. At the moment, lots of the Saudi fintechs that we see are still in competition mode, and they're competing with each other. And actually, we think that will evolve, and that will change. And the reason that should change, and going all the way back to something Amgad said, the Saudi GDP is 75-80% of the entire Middle East. I think the Saudis, fintechs, the pie is big enough. Pie is big enough to go around, and they need to work together to enlarge the size of the industry, to build up the knowledge economy around that industry, and then become, the New York and London, the Hong Kong, the Shanghai, but for the Middle East.
Thank you. So can you just flash up the poll results? I'm just going to come to each of our panel for a closing comment. And Camilla, it's your first trip to Riyadh, having worked with clients there for a long period. Are you excited about making the trip in November?
Yeah, I'm really, really looking forward to it. I've heard so much about the change that's taken place over the last few years, and we've always looked after clients from Saudi, but for all sorts of reasons, it was never that easy to travel there, and it's much easier to travel there now. So I'm super excited about it. I'm really excited, looking forward to our event, David, but also connecting with clients and other professionals during my visit.
Fantastic. Will you be pleased to read that question 3 on the polls was London and Dubai were top of the pops as places to invest. So plenty more to talk about in person. Jiggy, you're a regular visitor to Riyadh, but yeah, are you looking forward to the event coming up November?
Always, yeah. I mean, last year's event was fantastic. It was, the first kickoff in Riyadh, and there was a great turnout there. So I'm looking forward to this year and how that's developed and grown. And yeah, certainly seen a growth in the past year take place with Saudi clients. So excited to be back.
Fantastic. Well, we are out of time, but thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to all the panelists. It's been a terrific conversation. We look forward to sharing this with our audience and being in Riyadh live on the 12th of November. Look forward to seeing you then.